I don't know how to follow the pancake guy. That was awesome. So what I want to talk to you about is quick poll of the audience. So first of all, everyone raise a hand. One hand, I don't care which one. All right, so I just want to make sure all the arms work, because when I start asking questions, you guys don't raise your hands, and I don't really know what to do with that. So developers in the house. How many people are developers? Now, you security guys are probably developers too, but InfoSec? AppSec? Almost one. I got one hand. Okay. All right. So what I want to talk to you guys about is how to build your developers. Who has an InfoSec program at their company? AppSec program. All right. Only a couple. What I want to talk to you about is how to build your developers into security champions to help you scale your program to create safer software, so we're not getting hacked all the time. We heard a lot of the highlights. I love whiskey. I want to drink local whiskey, so if you know a good place in Christchurch for me to drink New Zealand whiskey, I'd love to hear about it. So what do I mean by security champions? So they are the eyes and ears of security. Think of it this way. You usually have probably 100 to 1 at least of developers to AppSec or even InfoSec people. And because of that ratio, it's like, well, what do I do with that? So we need to put some people out in the field that are on these teams and writing the software. And we give them some training, and we're going to go into some more details in here. One of the fun ones is doing CTF exercises with developers. They love this stuff. It opens up their eyes. They're like, wow, that's really cool. You teach them how to hack, and it teaches them how to be more defensive in their own coding. All right, so Star Wars theme. I love a good Star Wars talk. So we're going to talk about the program, talk about how to sell it, recruiting, things that we've learned along the way. So this is becoming very popular at InfoSec conferences. I've heard a lot of companies talk about their Security Champions program. So this is based upon what we learned building ours. I was part of that team that built this team. So no surprises here, right? Anyone know which one this is? Actually, this looks pretty good in this size. Anyone know which one this is? So that's the latest one. That's Equifax. We're getting hacked all the time, and we're getting owned for really stupid reasons. So in this particular case, they probably had no idea what open source software they were using. And when the CVE was announced, they're like, oh, that's interesting, struts, okay, fine. And had no idea till after the fact, when we went rooting around trying to figure out what happened, that we figured out what it was. So companies are doing a real poor job of figuring out what they're shipping and putting on the outside of their network. So all this hardening that we're doing is getting worked around by vulnerabilities in software that we can't prevent. We can't put a compensating control in front of some of these because it's actually using the things that the software is supposed to do. So talk a little bit about team sizes and release cadences around the different methodologies used in development today. So in your typical waterfall, you got 1 to 4 releases a year. That's probably the best you could ever do with waterfall. And they're very large teams. They're 50 or more people. You've got a bunch of specialists on those teams. So you've got DBAs and you've got developers and quality, and everyone has their own special job. When we move to Agile, in Agile, we're talking about when you get really good at this is once or twice a month I'm releasing my software, which is excellent. And now we've shrunk the team size. We've shrunk from 50 people down to 6 to 12 people. Now that has a lot of impacts on how you staff those teams, because what you want is something that's fully cross-functional that can build and ship the software. And you need to have some security expertise on that team. So in your 1 to 4 year release cadence, security has plenty of time to do their pen testing and all the other stuff that we have traditionally done to secure the software, because there's just so much time built into that schedule. But if you get to DevOps now, there are companies that do this dozens of times a day, hundreds of times a year at least, with that same team size. So if we look at how we got here, so this is our traditional waterfall. And in traditional waterfall, this is the way we set up our companies, right? We have people that write the specifications, developers, quality, security, operations. We have a VP in charge of each one of those. They have their little fiefdom. And we do these handoffs. We play telephone with each other. And what happens as a result of that is the person that writes the requirements has a really good idea what they want, and when they hand that off to development, we get a good glimpse of that. But the farther down the line we go, by the time it gets to the poor operations people, any ops people in the audience? Yeah, I'm sorry. By the time it gets to the operations people, they don't know what we built, why we built it, who it was built for, how it's supposed to operate, right? I've got this thing, it's on fire, I need to figure out how to make it run, whatever that means. Similarly, the development team builds it, quality gets a good first cut at understanding the trade-offs that they made, but by the time it gets to that poor operations guy at the end, he has to write scripts to say, I got to knock your process over every day because you're leaking resources, and if I don't, then production goes down, and then I get woken up in the middle of the night. So we've got all these scripts running all over the place trying to keep the software up and healthy. And we don't learn from him. So my operations guy, his information never comes up. He's too busy, and there's no channel. There's no channel provided for me to get that information. So when we moved to Agile, the first thing we did was we combined development and quality. We said we should put you guys in the same room. And now what we call done, so in the first operation, development said, I'm done coding, I'm done. And they hand it off to QA. In this case, now we say it's not done until you've tested it functionally. So it has to actually work before you can declare done. And then we have the same silos downstream. So with the same problems, but we have a bigger team that now gets that continuity of the business intent and the kind of trade-offs we made, but we still don't have that back channel. When we get to DevOps, we now put everybody in the same room. So I'm hearing from operations, I'm hearing from development, I'm hearing from quality. We talk about how the software operates. The mantra is you build it, you run it. So you change the way you write software because you're forced to operate it. And we get that nice continuity across that waterfront. Because now they understand the trade-offs that development made, and operations gets to have their input into how things are built. Okay, anyone not familiar with the Agile process? Happy to go through it. Just one hand. Anybody? Okay. All right, quickly here, the Agile methodology. So this is a picture of Agile Scrum. The guy or gal over there on the far side with the little light bulb is our product owner. That is a Scrum role. Their job is to tell us what to do and in what order. Here's the important things that the company needs to do and this team needs to do, and they specify it. And then we go into what's called a grooming session, and this is an important part, where we talk about the story and we try to make sure that the team understands, because as a team, we're going to commit to some work. In the traditional waterfall methodology, developers just do work and then they pick up the next piece of work. They weren't helping each other. In this model, inside of Agile, we work together to build whatever we said we were going to build. So we do something called planning poker. So it's a Fibonacci-ish sequence, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20, 40, and then off to infinity. It's relative sizing. So a 2 is about twice as big as a 1. So everyone on the team builds an understanding of what a 1 or a 2 is, and then we take a look at the work that's being presented to us and kind of size it. So if these two rows here are my Scrum team, and we each have a physical deck of cards. You can do it on your phone too, more fun with the cards. We'll talk about the story, and I'll say, all right, on 3, I want you to tell me how big this story is, and everyone's going to hold up their card. So I'll get a 1, I'll get a 13, a 20, and a 2. So the team itself doesn't understand this story. They need to understand together, so we'll talk about it. Why is it so easy? Why is it so hard? What are we missing? Until we get down to something that's kind of cohesive, so maybe we get to a 5. Once we do that, we go into a planning session, and inside of that planning session, we said, we know about how fast we go, and we know how many story points that we can do. So each one of those things in the backlog is called a story. So once we size them, we say, all right, we're going to do the first 4 items off of that list. We're going to build it to completion in a sprint, and a sprint is a time-boxed piece of work, so say 2 weeks. So in the next 2 weeks, we're going to build these 4 things and have them ready to go to our customers. We're going to talk about it every day in a stand-up, and this is a 5-minute ceremony. We talk about what did I do yesterday, what am I doing today, and am I blocked? And this is where your servant leader, your Scrum Master, comes in, because if I hear things like, I'm blocked, that's my cue to go free you up. I'm going to go remove that block for you. Or if you're falling behind and you're finished early, I'm going to tell you guys to work together so we get that story done and make sure that we finish everything that we planned. And then we go to the end, we demo it, and we do what's called a retrospective, and in that we answer 3 questions. What went well, what didn't go well, and how do we improve? Or in my world, what sucked, what didn't suck, and how do I suck less next time? Security is over here. They're not invited to the table. They don't get to talk. The way we have done security in Waterfall has fallen over into Agile and is starting to fall over into DevOps. And this is kind of why I'm out speaking about this. What happens is we test at the end. We get this release candidate. Hey, I'm ready to go. I found 15 things I need you to fix. The team says, whoa, we're going to release tomorrow. Can we just do the important ones? So which of the 15 is important? It's probably all of them, but what you end up doing is fighting over budget. So maybe you get 3, maybe you get 5 if you're lucky. The rest of them never get seen or heard from again, right? They go to the bottom of that backlog. All right, so the reason for security champions. So I got a CISO, why do I need, or I got an InfoSec team. Why do I need to have security champions? The things that a CISO or an InfoSec person is responsible for is ginormous. I talked to the CISO of Ticketmaster. They're actually also responsible for physical security at events. Now, if you know Ticketmaster, you know how many events they have every single day. He's responsible for that, as well as physical security on all the buildings, endpoint security, network security, all of that stuff falls under his domain. How much time do you think he spends on AppSec? So if we look at the AppSec problem, so again, typically you get that 100 to 1-ish ratio. I've got dozens or hundreds of teams. I've got thousands of applications. Some of the biggest companies in the world, 5, 8, 10,000 applications that they have on their networks that they either build or buy, or they stand up open source software. And they're doing a whole bunch of work as well. They're reporting cross-org, they're doing attestations to their customers, and they're doing risk assessments. So they are very busy as well. They don't have time. So all of those meetings that we talked about, especially the one where we talk about grooming, they can't attend every one of those for every one of these teams. It's physically impossible. Any red teamers here? Blue team? No team? You guys still there? Okay. So for those that don't know, red team, blue team is something where you have ethical hackers working for you, trying to break your software as a hacker. And you have a blue team that's trying to defend against that. So you kind of upskill everybody by continuing to break and fix the software and protect your environment. It leads to a lot of great learnings that you can take into your threat modeling for your application teams, and it leads to better software. It's expensive, it's hard to do. The way I think about it is really should only be used for high-value targets. So I don't want my ethical hackers finding cross-site scripting or SQL injection. Those are just silly. I can find those with much cheaper and easier with tools that are already out there. It's also very slow. So anyone do pen testing for a living? All right, I got a couple. Pen testing is measured on calendars. If we're talking about DevOps and we're talking about releasing 10 times a day, how do you pen test that? How can you possibly keep up with that workload? They're also incredibly hard to hire and keep happy. And if you look at the stats here, what is by 2019, 2 million open cybersecurity jobs. So everyone in the room here, we got a great future. It's never going to end. The hackers are always ahead of us. But that leaves a huge gap. What do you do in the meantime? How do you fix that problem if you're the lonely AppSec guy in a company trying to secure 3,000 applications? So to be clear now, I want to make sure you understand my definition of DevOps, because when I talk to a lot of prospects and customers, this is what they think it is. They consider it to be the people that write automation, the people that do a little bit of operations work, but it's a tooling team, essentially. Glorified release engineers with a DevOps title. But what I mean is this. So in DevOps, if you do it well, the people that write it operate it, which leads to learning, right? The whole intent of DevOps is fast learning, fast failure. If it breaks, I fix it. I learn from that. The next time I write it a little bit better. Also security. So security is we always do it last. Why do we do that to ourselves? Right? It just leads to bad outcomes. This is what we need, and this is why, again, why I'm out evangelizing. We have to think about security all the time. Whose job is it to do security in your company? Thank you, whoever said that. Everyone, you're exactly right. It's everyone's job, and yet we don't treat it that way. So I was with John Willis a couple weeks ago. He was a co-author of the DevOps Handbook, and he said, it would be an awesome world if I walked into my company and I let the door slam behind me, even though one of my coworkers who works right in a cube next to me, holding a bunch of packages in the rain, he looks at me and says, "Thank you." Because, you know, one badge, one entry means one badge, one entry. When I do that in my company, I do that to our CTO and co-founder. He tries to tailgate behind me. I'm like, we have to model the right behavior. So he has to badge in. We have to think about that. We have to take security seriously, and we have to make everyone take security seriously. So the previous talk about phishing emails, it's the same thing for your physical security, right? You are vulnerable if some attacker gets into your infrastructure. So can you stop them? This is what usually happens. You say, hey, got a gate. You guys got to pass security muster. Here's the policy. And it's either not really a gate and they just drive around it, or it's the escalating phone calls to my boss until my boss is bigger than your boss and mine says we're going to ship. So we ship. Or this one, which is also really bad, kind of funny when they think there's no gate, but there really is. And we stop the product from shipping, or we pull it back out of production. So here's the thing. Literally. Thank you. When I talk to people about application security, there is one thing, more than anything, that if you don't have it, everything is hard. And if you do have it, everything becomes easier. Anyone want to take a guess? Any brave people out there? What's that? No? Anybody else? Accountability. Now, I was at a B-Sides conference recently where one of the security guys was giving a talk. He was from OWASP, and he said, we are going to hold the developers accountable. Now, I'm both a developer and a security guy. That just feels really bad to me. I don't want to be held accountable for anything. I want to be told what the rules are. I want to be told what the standard is. I want to be given tools and training to understand how to get there. And then I want to hold myself accountable. So that's what I talk about when I talk about accountability. It has to be part of the goals for those individuals. It has to show up in their goals. If I'm not measured by it, I'm not going to do it. Developers are paid to ship software quickly. Period. Full stop. That's what they get gold on. Until the CIO agrees to put it in his goals and move that downhill, this thing doesn't change. So security people try to call their developers, they try to get them to do things, but they don't really have to, so you have to find someone friendly. It just makes a big mess where at the end of the day, the company really cares about this. These are board level discussions now, especially after the Equifax breach. Half of America, their PII was leaked. So it was me, one of my social security number is in that data. So selling this program, again, what we want is better outcomes. What we want is to have our influence felt all the way down at the individual contributor level inside of those teams. So when we talk to management, we're not asking for new recs. We're not asking for new people. What we're asking for is to use the people that are already there. I got people writing software. I got them on the team. They attend every single one of those ceremonies. So why don't we upskill some of them? For the team, it's about less wait time. You don't have to wait for a resource to be available. If I'm the lonely AppSec guy or I got a small team, I can't manage to fit everyone in one day. But if you have someone on your team that can do 80% of that work, guess what? You don't have to wait in line. And for the individual, it's all about saying, you are more valuable to us and you are more valuable to the world. So when you move on to your next job, and everyone has a next job, when you do that, you can put secure coder, security champion, you become more valuable, you get more money. So describing the job to them. Now this one came up as well today, talking about incident response. They're responsible for grooming, understanding that there are security implications. They're responsible for creating that bill of materials for the Equifax type things. If you ship software, you ought to know what it is. Because when the greatest example is, if you guys were all developers and I asked you, do you use JBoss or do you use struts in your application? It's an easy yes or no. I know whether I do or whether I don't if I've been on this project for a while. But if I say, do you use Apache Commons Collection 3.2.1? I don't know. I didn't pull that in. I didn't include that anywhere. Nobody does. It's baked into every single component that you bring in. And in fact, that particular component, in just 5 generations of open source components, is in more than 80,000 packages. That means it's probably in millions of applications. That one version of the library that has a deserialization vulnerability in it that you can't protect yourself against. So if you don't know that you're vulnerable, how do you even patch? So again, one case is very easy, one case not so easy. So they become my P-shirt, my product security incident response team. So what I ask of them is, here's the CVE, I know it's in your software, I need you to tell me, are you really vulnerable? So do you use that part of the component? How are you going to fix it? By when? And I need to know when it's done. That's the end of your job. You bring that out to the team and get them to respond to it. So recruiting, you need at least one. Volunteers are awesome. Voluntolds are okay. Again, I as an engineering manager, I hate bus factors of 1. So I don't want to have someone leave the team and then be without a security champion. So I really want to have 2 all the time. The other key point here is they need to be influencers. You know, the person that just graduated college is wicked excited, and maybe they're, do a little hacking on the side. Those people are awesome, but may not be the best fit for someone that comes in the room and says, stop, we have to talk about security now. Because if they're more junior, they're likely to get ignored or rolled over by people that are more experienced and been with the team and the company longer. So don't make it a new employee, okay? They don't know enough about the product. They don't know enough about the culture. They don't know enough about the team. You also don't want it to be an existing Scrum role. So I named 2 Scrum roles that are very important to the way Scrum operates. And by the way, DevOps usually runs on some type of Scrum. So I have a product owner, and I have, great, now I go blank now, Scrum Master. So those 2 roles, I don't want to overload them. They are very important roles that need to be done well, and I need this security champion's job to be something different, because the product owner is the one that sets all the priorities. I don't want him to have one bias or another on security. I need that to be brought to the table by somebody else. Now, when we train them, we're going to train them on the security fundamentals. So we'll teach them about CIA, deny by default, and trust no one. Also, like I said before, we're going to do capture the flag exercises. So for us, we do that every week. They bring their laptops to lunch, and we have some guided exercise. Okay, let's try to hack this. And we talk about it. We work on it individually. We work on it together. And it's a great way to learn how attackers get into applications. So grooming guidelines. Again, when we're talking about a new piece of work for the team, what we care about is understanding all the details, all the things that can go wrong, all the work that needs to be accounted for. So at some point we need to say pen test, or we need to say standard tools are okay. So steady state operations, I'm just modifying something, maybe that can go through static analysis, dynamic analysis, those kind of things, automated tooling. Sometimes I'm going to want to look at the design. I'm going to want to have someone with a security architecture background look at the design. Or maybe it's something where we're changing our crypto. If I'm doing that, pen test, please. So we'll give them this checklist for stuff that's important and tell them what to do about it. So that's how they start, right? We're going to start them with a very structured, rigid way of thinking about the world, give them those checklists and say, if this, then that, and then send them off into the world. There are things that, again, that they can't be trusted with because they just don't know what they don't know. So if it touches any of my critical controls, authorization, authentication, crypto, data validation, any kind of encoding, either inputs or outputs, those are the kind of things where I need to make sure that someone with a security background that understands the kind of mistakes that developers can make can help with that. And those are the things where I say, hey, this stuff needs pen test or it needs a secure code review. We're going to teach them how to do secure code reviews. So developers are very used to doing peer code reviews. So we'll look at it for functionality, we'll look at it for style, we'll look at it for good algorithms. But we need to teach them also how to look at things around security. But we're going to give them a very limited set of topics to work with, because, again, this is a lot for them to learn, and they need to start slow, and they will get better over time. We can add things to their plate as they get more and more mature in the organization. So the kind of things that we can talk to them about are error handling and logging and input sanitization and those things to make sure, or output encoding is another great one. Make sure that the developers are doing the right things. You can do those spot checks. So the kind of methodology is you have them shoulder surf you doing a secured code review, and then you reverse. Now you shoulder surf them. And then you spot check them. So give them the training and give them the know-how to do this stuff. All right, I love this one. Again, they don't know what they don't know. They don't have the kind of experience that we have. So give them goals, but make them reasonable. Because don't forget, they also have day jobs. This is, in addition to your current work, we need you to do this. So it can't be become a security expert this year. When we give them this power, we need to make it a slow deliverable process where we give them lots of training, give them lots of opportunities to fail in front of us for learning opportunities, and then we can let them go. And they need to understand that when they get over their skis, they call us. Now that means if we're the security guy and the phone rings and I recognize the number as one of my security champions, that means you pick it up. Whatever you're doing, they are your force multiplier, right? They are your AppSec army. You need to answer their phone call because they're not calling you for nothing. And if we don't make them feel like they're being supported, then they're going to start ignoring their job responsibilities, and they're not going to do a good job at this. So for measurements, we can give them some certifications. So we have built out a little certification program around doing secure code reviews. So there are things planted in code. We give it to them. We have them go look at it, and then they come back with their findings. And if they do a good job at those examples, we'll give them an internal certification for that. For the teams, think about a maturity model for AppSec, right? So we start with ostrich with its head in the ground, where I don't know anything about my application security. I get to a baseline where I know it's bad, to the next stage, which is I am now reacting to the scans. So we scan regularly, I fix things. We scan again, I fix things. That doesn't fix the problem. That doesn't stop the bleeding. In that world, you have to shift the development left to give them the security tools to do that while they're writing the code, which then becomes proactive, which is the next level in that maturity curve. So we want to move them along that. So we take a look at the teams, we put them on a maturity scale, and we try to help them come up to that next level. So that's part of the goals for the year, is moving them up to that next level, towards it at least. And make sure you're clear with your expectations. Clarity and measurement that is not arbitrary is incredibly important to know whether they're succeeding or not. All right, so who doesn't like rewards? So when we talk about this, we sometimes say, hey, let's give them T-shirts, or let's give them special coffee mugs that have, Security Champions program at Veracode, for instance. Have them attend conferences. So I did a B-Sides in Boston, which is where I'm from. We had 6 of our security champions in the audience. It's a great way for them to go out and train, hear them talk about tearing down hardware on a pancake maker and how to, insert new stuff. It's not about the pancake maker. It's about that process of ripping the thing apart to understand how it works, to put it back together to do what you want it to do, which is what hackers do. I love this stuff. And they need to see it. And when they see it, they start to understand it. They get that itch, because developers take a lot of pride in their work, and they don't want it to be broken in that way. Again, the internal CTF exercises are a lot of fun for them. Giving them swag, so like my suggestions before. So for us, we have to learn about their world. So has anyone read The Phoenix Project? I have. I got 4. If you want to understand how software is built today, if you want to understand DevOps, that is critical reading. It's like a weekend's worth of reading, honestly. It's a story, but it tells the story of how software is built typically and how it needs to get built in the future. Written by Gene Kim. The DevOps Handbook is the next one, which has individual section on it, including one on security, by the way, that goes more in depth, has case studies, and is an excellent, excellent resource. You need to build those relationships, and you should attend some of those ceremonies. So in Scrum, there are two types of people in a meeting. There are pigs and there are chickens. Pigs are the people that do the work, right? So they're your developers, they're your scrum master and your product owner. They get to talk at the meeting. If you're a chicken, which means I'm visiting, you don't get to talk, but you get to experience it. So if you're a security person and you have developers doing work for which you expect an outcome, get to know how they make the sausage. Go to their meetings, understand how they do their work, and start to influence them by speaking their language. So I swear to God, if any of you walk out of here, go to your scrum master and say, hey, can I be a chicken in your next grooming session? They'll be like, you want to do what now? Who? It's like, where did you learn those words? It's like the secret code. Now they feel like you care, you're trying to help and not hurt, right? We're not there at the end. I want to be there at the beginning. I'm trying to understand this stuff. You start speaking their language, they're going to invite you in. And they'll start learning your lingo. Learning their tools, or let's say I want to write some centralized function to do all input validation and output encoding. Go try to do that. If you haven't written code and released it for an enterprise, now hacking is one thing, and you know, writing a little Arduino code, which I love to do on the side, is one thing. But to write something that gets vigorously tested and security tested and released is completely different. So if you want to experience that world and really understand what developers face, write some security functions. Make them part of the security process for your company. Say, hey, if you use these input validation routines and these encoders, it's on me to make them secure, and it's on me to make them work. Now, we allow everyone to get into our security coding, but we have a process that we go and validate it. But we've done that. We've had our security people go write these libraries such that we have one base of information, and we don't have to go out and look at everything else. We know if they use the functions that they're going to work properly. All right, so in conclusion, you need to customize this to your own environment. Our work environment is one thing, yours is going to be another. Your culture is going to be different. You're going to need to sell the program. You're going to need to fail a couple of times. Failure has to be okay. And then you pick it up and you fix it and you look at it and like, I mean, the example of Pancake Maker, again, I bricked the hardware. I bricked my security champion. I have to go build another one. He's useless to me now. Doing that over and over again and getting better at it and getting those learnings, and then maybe coming up here and talking to your peers about it, about the lessons that you learned in your company, because my lessons and yours are going to be different. Have empathy for what they do. Their work is hard too. I've done it for 25 years. It is hard to do that for an enterprise. So have some empathy around that and be able to speak their language. Over-communicate what you expect. And as I said before, be responsive. If your security champion calls you or one of your security champions, you have to pick up the phone and make them feel like you care. Stay engaged with your program. Even if it starts to peter off, you got to put some effort into it to get it back on track. It's incredibly important. You know, the one thing that I'm speaking of more than ever right now, besides accountability, is that open source problem. Developers integrate and abandon their software. And if you think about what modern software is, which is in a microservice, probably 95% open source code. 5% of it's my first party code that glues all those libraries together and makes them do something interesting for my company. So if you think about the problem of having 95% of my stuff integrated and then forgotten about, and I always go over that 5%, that stuff stays pretty secure. Hackers, and I heard this again today, don't care about trying to find the hard way if you leave the doors open. Right? If I can do a remote code execution, if I can just use a botnet and go find all the people that are using that vulnerable version of struts, then I'll go look at them and say, all right, well, that's interesting. I got a hit here. Let me go look deeper. Don't be that person. Sweat the small stuff. Make sure that you have that stuff taken care of. All right, off my soapbox. Thank you very much. I will take questions.
You were explaining about Agile, and I don't know a lot about that, to be fair. So that was very interesting. Thank you very much. But I picked up on a point you were saying about testing and reiteration. I mean, in our enterprise, pen tests cost about $5 grand. If you only have the waterfall, then you possibly do one pen test, fix it, and maybe another to test to see if it's been fixed.
Absolutely.
If you're going to be doing Agile or DevOps and a lot of pen tests, I can see you sort of burning $25 grand.
That is an awesome point. And what you do is you go out and buy, I'm a vendor, so I'm not going to tell you which tools, but you go out and buy static analysis tools
which can find it better, faster, and cheaper, and earlier, by the way. There are companies that build it into the IDE, so that while I'm typing code, it's almost like Word. It does spell checking and grammar checking. It says, oh look, SQL injection right here. Oh look, cross-site scripting right there. Those things can get caught earlier and can get caught and run regularly. They run in minutes to maybe an hour, depending on how complex your code is. So you can flush all that stuff out and think of it as, so another key term in a Scrum team is the definition of done. So that is, if I pick up a story, I'm going to do some work. There's some checklist that I need to go through, which means I write unit tests, for instance. I have to run static analysis, and I have to clean those results. At our company, we have zero tolerance for any new vulnerabilities getting into our source code base, known vulnerabilities, that is. So you can find those things earlier and better with tools that integrate into, for instance, Jenkins. So you can do your CI build and do assurance testing there. But also, like I said, you have to have the developer have those tools and techniques. I have longer form talks on how to build out a good AppSec program that talks about that shift left, about using those tools to do the right things. And using, remember I said not everything gets pen tested? I only want to do that for the stuff that really matters. If they're touching crypto, I care a lot about whether that gets done right. If it's like they
Didn't use an input validation routine, the software will find that for you and fix that. And they can fix that before they go. And just use pen testing for the really important stuff, because you're right, it's expensive. And by the way, when I'm releasing 10 times a day, it doesn't scale. I measure pen tests in calendars, right? Not in minutes.
You've got 6 champions, so your org's pretty big by New Zealand standards. What's the model that's going to work for an ecosystem with a lot of smaller development shops?
So only maybe a couple of teams? But how many teams are we talking about?
Well, I'm thinking if you want the critical mass where you're hitting like 50 people and the investment's worthwhile, to me that looks like it's going to cross different organizations.
So the investment's worthwhile. So I would argue that you always want to have this.
Yes.
Again, as an InfoSec person, you can't be at every meeting, so you need to bake that into your teams. So having those champions available to you, no matter how many teams you have. This works at companies that have hundreds of teams as well. There's a little better modeling around how you manage that program, but building it is pretty much the same.
Okay.
So I think it's always worth it.
No, I totally agree. I just think this is something for maybe New Zealand as a whole, as a community thing, as well as within.
Oh, I see. So like birds of a feather
Yeah.
in New Zealand. That's a good idea. Yes, sir.
So one of the things about software development in the industry is that you have that high turnover of developers, right?
Yeah.
The one figures a way to get more money is not by doing training or whatever, it's by changing jobs.
Yes.
Doesn't this kind of encourage people, it seems like you're going to go through lots of security people, who each of them are going to go through the same cycle.
All right. So the question was, there's a high turnover rate in my developers. What do I do about that? Seems like I'm always going to be training. It's like, well, what's the alternative? Honestly, like I said, I hate bus factors of 1. So if I have 2 on every team, then when that first one leaves, I can start training another one. Or they can peer train each other. So when your program gets more and more mature, you might designate some people that have been with the company, like I've been with my company for 12 years. So I might be a good candidate to start mentoring and doing that first level training, because I've been doing it so long, to build out that ecosystem. So you can get a deeper bench if you want to, but really there is no other alternative than to keep training, because developers. So for my software developers, anyone take like secure coding courses in college? I know when I went to school there weren't any. Is it required for your degree? No. So it's not required. So unless you have some kind of security instinct where it's like, that's an itch I want to scratch, you don't take it, so you don't get trained, and now I got to train you. Most of the workforce around the world is exactly the same. They're not trained in this stuff. We need to train them. And yes, it's a constant effort. Yes, sir.
Just want to follow up on a couple of questions and get your opinion. So we see a real shift in this happening in New Zealand. People move to Agile, having combat this AD for security, and we've seen people follow a couple of different methods. One, exactly what you're saying, and where it was over there raises a really good point. Like New Zealand's really quite small, resourcing funding, etc. What is your opinion
Okay, so if I've captured the question correctly, it's the ecosystem's small, I may not be able to train them. What if I outsource this? What would be a different model to go after this thing? So I guess the next questions I would ask you is, do you have money to outsource these people? Because it's actually cheaper to buy them and have them work on your team.
If you have someone, you know, involved in the development process for a couple of hours to go through as part of the design, then, more of a permanent fixture, but not.
So a shared resource model.
Something like that.
Yeah. So look, this all. So what is it? The best plans of battle fall apart as soon as you get smacked in the face. As soon as you meet the enemy, everything falls apart. So your company may be different, and maybe New Zealand is different. If you have to share, then maybe that's an okay model. Again, the problem is that you have multiple things over the life of a piece of software, from when I'm talking about the idea to I've designed it, to I've coded it, and I'm doing testing on it. Across those facets, you have a team of people that sit together and talk about it every day. What you really want is to have that baked into the team. Now, if you can't, and they can only attend certain ceremonies, then you have to take a look at trying to coordinate schedules so this resource is available, or you need to have multiple of them just to cover these various meetings to make sure that they're in the room, but also that learning doesn't necessarily take place in those teams. It might be a good way to scale up a team. Again, your mileage may vary. There are multiple ways to get from A to B. What I believe is that the DevOps team needs to be fully cross-functional. And really, Agile teams want to be the same way. I need to have all of the people in the room because I can't afford to share. As you think about how companies want to release software very quickly, the fastest model is to do no handoffs at all. So if I'm a developer, and I got a longer talk on this as well, called full spectrum engineer, where you say, hey, I'm going to plan it, I'm going to write it, I'm going to test it because I'm good at QA, and now I'm going to start to get into really weird stuff like, I'm going to do the security testing. And by the way, I'm doing containers, so I'm picking operating systems and open source software, and I'm terraforming environments in the cloud, and all of those things that we were never trained to do as engineers, that now I need to pick up those skills. Because, like I said, the fastest way is for me not to hand it off to anybody. So I start to grow those skills as a byproduct of doing that, to work on those DevOps teams to really move fast, to do that single piece flow. One idea, one developer, checked in, out the door. And then the next piece of work comes in. That's how we get to multiple releases a day, not by a whole team doing a bunch of work, by one person doing work and getting it done. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Am I allowed to have an opinion? Is that
You are allowed to have, I'm happy to be wrong.
No, I'm not saying you're wrong. I think one good way of doing it is the person that you outsource as Peter's role to train the champions within the teams and to be the person to bounce ideas on.
So not as a replacement.
Yeah, so not.
I mean, even if it was like a temporary thing while the team gets upskilled.
Sure.
Yeah. So
And it might be something where New Zealand could grow a certification program. Maybe there's a way to do that where you could actually pay to get certified as a security champion. And there's some certain things that are specific to your company or specific to your team, but in general, that kind of security awareness is something that we could build at maybe a B-Sides conference or something else where you bring in, maybe you get a discounted ticket if you bring a developer with you to your B-Sides conference. And the developer gets in free because we're going to train him. I mean, really, it's about spreading the information. I see he's standing up. I must be almost out of time. How am I doing? All right. Anybody else? All right. I thank you very much for your time today.